Now I'm very pleased to invite Shri S. Krishnan, Secretary, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, to deliver his talk on driving the future, the role of government in accelerating data science and AI innovation. Please put your hands together to welcome Shri S. Krishnan over to the stage.
Director of the Indian Institute of Science, Dr. Rangarajan, Professor Inder Gopal, the Chair of the Center for Data for Public Good, Shri Sharad Sharma of iSpirit, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure. I think this particular symposium, the third edition of the symposium, which CDPG is organizing, and I think we're getting closer to the 1200 number that Professor Inder Gopal was concerned about, is I think very, very timely, more timely than we realize. There are many conversations which are taking place around data, many conversations and concerns about what is happening with data sharing, how data is used. It's a debate that comes up all the time. People who probably didn't care very much about how data went, where data went, what exactly happened, suddenly it has become the area of true concern. Quite honestly, in my view, I mean, there are 2 or 3 dimensions to it. One dimension, of course, is what my ministry has been attempting to do in terms of ensuring that personal data or private data, the privacy is protected, and what would be the best way or best mechanism of doing it. Many of you are familiar with the Digital Personal Data Protection Act and the rules which have been put out. The draft rules were put out and the final rules are expected to be finalized any time now. I mean, the work on behalf of the ministry is done and it's only the legal vetting process. So at any point in time, those rules will be out. And that fundamentally, at the level of a personal data which concerns all of us as citizens, basically gives you an assurance that the data can be used only with your consent. And it is what it recognizes is that any personally identifiable data, and that definition is fairly wide, anything that can be linked back to an individual or a person is treated as personally identifiable data, and the control over that data rests with the person to whom it belongs. And it is only with your consent that it could be used for a variety of purposes. And people who hold that data on your behalf, those whom we call data fiduciaries, can really take that data and use it only for those purposes for which you consent. So that framework should be in place fairly quickly, and that framework also provides a way to deal with all the legacy data which is already with a number of the data fiduciaries or number of agencies who would have collected that data from you as individuals. And once that framework is fully operational and in place, it gives individuals a fair amount of control on the kind of data that they hold. But I think today is not the day to talk about how you protect your data and the importance of protecting data. And undoubtedly many of us from our day-to-day lives realize that protecting the data and preserving the way it is held is something which is critical and vital, and we would love to maintain it that way. We would like to keep it that way for whatever reasons. You want to share it, you share it. If you don't want to share it, you don't share it. Although given today's social media, there's a fair bit of oversharing as well, but that is largely a behavioral issue, and that is individual choice. So one is not going into what is happening on a matter of individual choice. And of course, even within social media, there are ways in which you need to train people. What can you share? What can't you share? And a process of education, particularly for people who are much younger. And in that sense, the age of consent, literally, in the case of the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, is actually 18. So people who are below 18, consent has to be obtained from verifiable parental consent has to be obtained. So to that extent, even that protection is built in. But setting that aside for a moment, I think the critical element is that data at such volume is something that can be harnessed for public good. And that is the entire premise of the Center for Data for Public Good, and the way in which data can be utilized, the way in which data can be used. And one of the biggest custodians of data of various kinds, including some personal data and a lot of non-personal data, is government and various agencies of government. And especially when the delivery of a lot of services has been automated, is done in a digital environment, the volume of data is huge, and the way that it can be harnessed is also immense. Earlier, a lot of this data was, if you looked at it, all the data was there, but it was all in registers and in large books and ledgers and other documents, in physical documents written down somewhere. And the effort of putting it together itself was a huge effort. But once it is digitized and once it's maintained centrally, the possibilities of a lot of this data being used for a number of useful and practical purposes is immense. And quite honestly, I think we have not got very far yet with the way that this is used, because number of issues. A lot of the data is in silos, a lot of the data is sitting with various ministries, a lot of it has been collected, and a lot of it is actually transactional data. It's individuals transacting with various agencies in government whose data lies there. Likewise, with a number of other public entities also, when we transact business, then your data is with them, whether it is financial institution, whether it's a bank, whether it is some other agency, a lot of that data is available. And the way in which this data can be used and for the kind of decisions for which you can use it, I mean, the possibilities again are immense. And the interesting thing is that the people who hold this data, or people who can even envision what can be done with this data, or who are sitting and can use this data more effectively, are probably not even aware of all the possibilities all the time. I mean, just to give you an example, many years ago, I recall that we were trying to locate where should we locate. I used to be Commissioner of Commercial Taxes at that time. So where do you locate your new offices? Which are the places that you need to go to? And are you adequately present at various locations? Now, then how do you arrive at these decisions? Now, there are other sources of data which could give you interesting insights into this. The number of commercial or industrial electricity connections plotted on a map would tell you where that concentration is. Very interestingly, RBI still puts out that data where they talk about the 250 centers in the country where the highest deposits are there and highest credit outlay is there. So if you pull that list out, then you'll find that, which are the really economically active parts of the state or economically active parts of the country where you could locate. So in that sense, I mean, there may be no personal data there, but the insights can be tremendous. Equally, I remember, many years ago, then similar to that, we then had I've worked closely with JPAL at that point. We had an MOU working with them, and we got them into areas. JPAL is traditionally known for doing RCTs, randomized controlled trials, in order to establish, and that's fundamentally about evidence and data, as to whether a particular approach to a developmental problem is the right one, the most cost-effective one, and so on. But we got them into a number of other areas of interest as well, because we said, there's a huge volume of administrative data. Can we look at it differently to see what conclusions it leads to? So one set of data, two sets of data which were very interesting and which we looked at that point. One was about the health insurance data, the government health insurance program. as to what are the kind of diseases for which most people are seeking treatment, which are the places in the state from which they are seeking treatment, and where do they go, and which hospitals and where do they go for treatment, and what do we see from this, and so on. Extremely interesting insights as to where the flow takes place, where awareness levels are lower, where things can move faster, and that analysis yields, and where you probably need to locate a number of other facilities. Equally, we used to have a database on road accidents and where the road accidents take place and what the issues are and so on, and a complete audit and mapping of how this happens. And you could pull up a range of things from that set of data to figure out where do you sort of address issues of black spots, how do you sort of do it better, what engineering solutions do you need to design for that, and even better, where do you, in order not to miss the golden hour immediately after an accident, where do you locate your ambulances so that they can reach a spot quickly and also get to a hospital with trauma care fairly quickly. So a number of these very crucial, critical, life-saving decisions can actually be made when you look at this data carefully, when you have access to it, and when you're able to analyze it in real time. But the insights which can be thrown up with this data are probably, many of them are counterintuitive. Many of them cannot even be imagined by the people who actually are sitting on it. And it's really others who examine it and others who look at it and experts who look at it who can probably come up with completely different ideas and completely different ways in which this can be done. Which then makes it very important that you should have a mechanism by which some of this data, or at least a significant proportion of this data, is shared first within the government establishments, not just within, and eventually more broadly for innovation amongst a set of innovators, researchers, and others who can, even startups and a whole host of others need to have access to this kind of data to figure out what can they do. And of course, in the business world and in the entire marketing world, in the retail world, for many, many years now, for many decades now, this has been the mainstay of how they've been trying to influence choice, how they've been trying to figure out how you can sell better to whom, and what is it that you need to do, where you need to locate. All of those decisions are taken on the basis of so much of solid data. And many of us also know that manufacturing processes are improved on the basis of data collection and what you measure. So all of this has relied on data, and many more of these tools need to be applied much more to governance than they are right now. And that is, I think, the crucial test that we need to meet and we have to enable. And so you have this twin challenges of there's so much of data that you're sitting on, and how do you sort of make it accessible in a usable form for people who really need it. And this has become much more important in the context of artificial intelligence and how the databases can be used in AI. And I think there it's interesting what we are attempting to do through the India AI mission. MeitY itself is looking to see how we can make databases more accessible, more usable. We can see how we can actually work a mechanism by which databases are more easily accessible for research and other purposes. So the AI mission itself, which is almost about 10,374 crores, has a number of elements. Most critical element is how to make more compute available, and today I'm not going to speak about that. Another critical element is, actually building India's own AI models. Some work is already going on. I think some scholars from IISc are also involved in that process, as are from other IITs and so on. But one critical element is making available data sets. And when we started the AI Kosh, so to speak, the idea was initially that we focus primarily on making available data sets. The AI Kosh was intended as a treasure house or as a store of data sets. Eventually, we just made it a platform where access to compute, access to applications, all of that was also added there. But fundamentally, it started with the idea that we should have shareable data sets. And I think there's been a fair amount of movement there. More than 2,000 data sets are currently available on the AI Kosh. And I would encourage all of you to use them and tell us what your experience with them is, how we can improve, what we can add, so that we can push with a range of ministries and departments to make sure that we are able to get better data sets and more active data sets available. I can assure you that it's not easy to get all of those data sets. It's not easy. People do not immediately cooperate in making things available. Part of it is on the basis of concerns about what will happen if more of this information goes out into the public domain. What will happen if we are judged on the basis of a lot of what is going out? Will people ask us a lot of questions? Will a number of other issues come up? And some of them are very legitimate concerns in terms of what happens to anonymity and what happens because a lot of the data is personally identifiable. And some of the most useful data ends up being very sensitive personal data, stuff like financial data or medical and health records related data. And therefore, we have to ensure that individuals are not affected when this kind of data gets shared, and therefore it's a question of aggregation and aggregate data which is made available so that we are able to at least mask the identity of individuals or set in place protocols whereby individual or personally identifiable data doesn't get out into the public domain. So I think we have to sort of put in place mechanisms by which these aspects are, strictly speaking, or effectively controlled. Also, in order to make a lot of the sharing available, I think it's also important to give the agencies themselves the feeling and understanding that they continue to retain control of the data, that the data continues to reside in them, and it is not something which is taken into a central it is not something which gets taken or pulled into a central database, and it's not something which is held in a way that compromises the interests of a particular ministry or department. I think that becomes the other crucial element where assurances need to be given. Today, I think technology provides us ways in which the data can be shared without it being fundamentally at one location. Sometimes I can frankly admit even our own agencies don't do the right job or don't make the data available at the right levels for decision making even when they create systems. There are some examples of that. One example is the entire public distribution system database structure which was built, saying that a deputy secretary sitting in the Ministry of Food in Delhi can actually view individual transactions which are taking place in any ration shop anywhere in the country. But that data is not available at this, or was not available till recently at the state level or the district level, where I think maximum use of that or operational use of that could have been far more effective. So sometimes we do mix up, and one of the issues with digitization and computerization of data is also the tendency towards centralization. And that is something which I think within the AI course framework we have very, very consciously tried to avoid and tried to make it a federating structure where you can draw data from the basic databases where they are available and something which can be shared. I'm aware that CDPG themselves have created such a structure with the IUDX and with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Our intent is eventually to make sure that this kind of data sharing APIs through the API Setu, which MeitY again promotes, is something that we permit various agencies and departments to actually access and look to see how the sharing happens in a way that is real time and at the same time leaves the people who are custodians or fiduciaries of data to be primarily the entities who need to be protected in that. So I think a lot of this is then very critical in the way that we share data. And this is one reason why for MeitY this becomes very important, and we continue to support various efforts, including by the CDPG, to support this. And recently, again, we sanctioned a new project on preserving data processing and exchange for sensitive data, privacy preserving data processing and exchange for sensitive data in the National Digital Public Infrastructure. We sanctioned it to a set of 6 entities, including the Center for Data for Public Good here in IISC and a number of other institutions. And totally, I think the biggest chunk of money, about 40 crores, is intended for CDPG. And the basic objective there is to make sure that the privacy preservation and ways in which we can share the data in a manner which becomes the easiest way in which this can be put together is critically sort of preserved. And that, I think, the important thing is to ensure that people have a sense of control, and people are led to believe that they control the data, it continues to be in their control. It's something that doesn't go beyond that. And I think that's very critical. And linked with all this data, I mean, with great power comes great responsibility. So linked with all of this data and linked to ensuring that the data is safe, one part, of course, is the privacy preserving mechanisms through which the data can be stored and the mechanism through which this can be done. I think that is a critical element, critical dimension of what needs to be done. Many of you are technically working on it. We would love to take the outcomes of all this and put it together in a framework which becomes a techno-legal framework to manage this. And that, I think, would be a key contribution that we can make in the days to come. But equally, at all times, the other important element which we need to look at in this context is the context of cybersecurity. And we have to understand that, under the DPDP Act, there is a provision for fairly hefty fines in case private data leaks. And if the data doesn't stay available, and if it leaks, then there are very, very hefty fines which can extend all the way up to 250 crores. And as I'm very fond of reminding my colleagues in the government agencies which are responsible for managing or maintaining private data or personal data are not exempt from this requirement. They can also be fined. So the responsibility for ensuring that the security of the data is maintained and cybersecurity is preserved is something which falls on all of us who hold a lot of this data as fiduciaries, and therefore ensuring adequate cybersecurity for this is something which is very important. I think awareness on cybersecurity is growing. More of it needs to happen. More solutions need to be developed, and we need to seriously have a mechanism by which these issues are addressed in a way that we enable this. So we are going to have, I think this is, in that sense, one of the most critical areas. And if I were to sum up very quickly, I think there are 3 dimensions of this. One, the huge opportunities of using data, analyzing it, and creating economic benefit out of it is tremendous. And that is something which clearly needs to be harnessed and needs to be done. If we are talking about AI as the horizontal technology which is going to push the world and India's overall economic growth trajectory up, and especially in a country like India where the opportunities are immense and it needs to be pushed up, our opportunity to become a developed nation is truly only by riding on a technology wave, and possibly AI is a very important part of that wave, and having access to data sets is a very important way of ensuring that AI works for us. So to that extent, I think there's a clear recognition that allowing access to data and figuring out ways in which data can be used more innovatively and the innovation that can take place in that space is critical for the trajectory of economic development that the country will see in the coming decades. So to that extent, it's very crucial that we look at it. The second dimension of it is truly that, again, data is personal to many of us. Data is also significant in terms of what it can yield to our adversaries, and therefore protecting this data, preserving the privacy of it, both elements, both the security, protecting it, even if it is not personal data, and when it is personal data, ensuring that privacy is maintained and individuals don't lose out in the process is critical. And for that, there are two dimensions. One is a legal dimension. As far as the personal data is concerned, the protection of that privacy is something which, under the DPDP Act and the rules, is that mechanism is in place and it will be rolled out. That gets taken care of. We may need some further legal mechanisms by which, other than personalized data, how it gets shared is something that we have to look at. So there is one element of it which is a legal mechanism, and another element of it which is truly a technological mechanism. And I think and if you put the two together, to use a favorite phrase of Mr. Sharad Sharma, who's present here, is a techno-legal framework to address this issue. So that is something which I think is the next step that we need to take. And it's truly through symposia of this nature and the outcomes that you are able to provide us, we would be able to move forward on putting together an appropriate technical methodology of sharing this, ensuring that concerns of security and privacy are met, ensuring that the people who need to have the data have it at the right time, but have it in a way that that preserves the security and the sanctity of the way that data needs to be maintained. And I think in that sense, since all of us are stakeholders in this entire game, it's something which concerns each one of us, and something which, the way we deal with data and the way we handle data clearly needs to be transparent, clearly needs to be a mechanism which all of us are party to, and needs to be a mechanism that each one of us can trust. And that is crucially the challenge that we have to deal with. Ensure that we achieve innovation, ensure that we achieve productivity and growth while preserving the kind of trust and safety that we need to. And I would look for the answers that symposia of this nature provide, guide us in the way that public policy takes us forward in this space, and truly open up more opportunities for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnan. We at CDPG are very committed to contribute to this data and AI ecosystem of the nation. And now I'll ask my colleague Bala to hand over a token of appreciation to you. Please put your hands together.